Thank you for taking the time to listen to this message, and I hope everyone is having a good day. Our first lesson is from Ezekiel chapter 17. Some background as usual. Ezekiel was a prophet around 593 BC. At that time, many of the Israelites were in exile in Babylon. The previous verses were an account of the judgment brought against the Israelites for their unfaithfulness and the breaking of their covenant with God. Our verses are quite the opposite. They are an account of redemption and of salvation, a renewal, giving hope to God's people. Take note of all the I statements in our verses. It is God's direct intervention. God is promising to restore the people of Israel back to Mount Zion. This reading is in direct parallel to our gospel reading. And again, as in my last message, we see an early reference to the inclusion of Gentiles into the kingdom. This is found in the verse under it, every kind of bird will live. And in verse 24, all the trees of the field is a metaphor for all the people of the world. God will restore his people to their homeland, which will bear testimony to his power and as to his love. Also take note of the ending of verse 24. Is this not the same thing we hear from Jesus? The last will be first, and the first will be last. Another example of the continuity between the Old and New Testament. And why not? We have the same author. Our psalm is Psalm 92. Pay particular attention to verses 13 and 14, how it reiterates what is being said in Ezekiel and the parables in our gospel lesson. There is planting and the bearing of fruit, green and succulent. Our second reading comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 5. In our second lesson, we have the familiar phrase, we are to walk or live by faith and not by sight. Paul has a lot to tell us, and as usual, it applies not just to the church in Corinth, but also to the church at 45 North Reading Avenue. In Hebrews, we are told that faith is assurance of things hoped for, proof of things not seen. Some people insist that they don't believe in anything they cannot see and touch. But walking by sight alone means we will never believe in love, faith, and hope. Walk by faith, not by sight, means we live by God's guidance day by day. Something that I can't say that I do every day. Sometimes I am walking way too much by sight and not by faith. In verse 9, I believe Paul is saying that we are to make our place on earth as much like heaven as we can. Verse 10 says, all must appear before the judgment seat of Christ. There are no secrets from Christ. We will appear as an open book before him. The basis for this judgment will be whether we have shown mercy to vulnerable people that are in our midst, our neighbors. And Paul says we should not judge by worldly standards. Those standards count for nothing in God's eyes. In verse 11, Paul mentions knowing the fear of the Lord. I like to think of the fear of the Lord as reverence and faith that lead to obedience. And we are supposed to look at the heart of other people and not their outward appearance or by worldly measures. In Samuel 16, Yahweh said to Samuel, don't look on his face or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For I see not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but Yahweh looks at the heart. Too often I have been guilty of this. We are called to live by the heart with the understanding that our hearts are anchored in Jesus Christ. Our hearts are not free to go with our desires, our wants, but our hearts are controlled by the love of Christ. Therefore, we lead lives of sacrifice and service to others. We live for God. We are that new creation, similar to the new beginnings in Ezekiel and Mark. As in the past Sundays, our gospel lesson comes from Mark. This Sunday, we're in chapter 4, where Jesus has provided us with 4 parables. Our lesson covers the last 2, the growing seed and the mustard seed, both dealing with the kingdom of God. Both parables have imagery that starts out small with the planting of seeds or twigs giving new life. Seeds have power, producing plants whose roots can crack rocks, establishing a firm foundation. Reminds me of the rock, the firm foundation of Christ. The parable tells us the growth is slow. It may take weeks or months before we see any real change. And any of us that have planted seeds or tried to grow something know this is definitely true. The kingdom of God is like this slow but steady growth. To help make this point, I want to share with you a brief reading. We preach and invite and witness, but the results are overwhelmingly ordinary. A few children come to listen to the children's sermon. An awkward teenager presents himself for baptism or confirmation. A young couple chooses to be married in the church. A men's group studies a popular Christian book. A women's group raises money to buy a heifer for people on the other side of the world. It seems not to amount to much of anything, but the seed is growing. God is present. That's the point. So also for us individually, that seed planted in us could take years or decades to sprout. This is generally the case with our faith. It continues to deepen and strengthen over time. Those who have faith can find rest and protection. And as we grow larger, stronger, others can find shelter under our branches, our guidance. This is the same as the kingdom grows and grows to fruition. The kingdom is self-sustaining. We're told the earth bears fruit by itself. This is evident by this driving around in the countryside, seeing flowers, weeds, trees, all growing up on their own. How this life starts, we do not know, but it does. There is a life force intrinsic to the plant and to us. It is put there by God, the Creator. These parables are reminding us that God is in control. He provides the life, the fruit, the faith. The kingdom is ever-changing and growing. But it is not exclusive, it is inclusive. All are welcome. Our last verses tell us how Jesus spoke in parables. Why? Well, one of the interesting things about parables is that they can be adapted to fit multiple historical and social contexts. They're not relegated to a particular time or place or culture. I'd like to close with something from the last lesson I did with you, and I hope you were able to dwell on it and think about it, but I would like to repeat it. The enactment of divine love and grace has altered everything about who we are and whose we are, about how we live, why we live, and even where we live. Be courageous in the faith. Take care.